Dickie Dread, New Age Travellers, A History 1960 to 1990. Chapter 7, Continuity and Social Collapse. The Spirit continues. The Battle of Beanfield in June 1985 had been brutal and final. The convoy was crushed, vehicles smashed, hundreds arrested, and the annual gathering at Stonehenge forcibly ended. For the first time in over a decade, the summer solstice passed in near silence. But come 1986, there was still hope, or perhaps defiance. Some travellers, anarcho-punks, pagans and druids believed they could return. Not with a full-blown festival, not yet, but with a vigil, a protest, a reclaiming of the spirit. Instead, they were met with Operation Daybreak, a continuation and escalation of the state's new zero-tolerance approach to free festivals. Over 600 officers, including riot units, were deployed in Wiltshire countryside. Massive exclusion zones, up to 4 miles wide, were established around the stones. Police roadblocks were set up for miles in every direction. Anyone who even looked like a traveller was turned away. Aerial surveillance, horse-mounted officers and rapid response units were on standby. The message was clear: no gathering, no worship, no culture outside the law. Despite the clampdown, small groups still tried to reach the stones. Some were former convoy members, others were new faces, young anarchists and druids, many of whom had never made it to the site before. Vehicles were stopped and searched without clear cause. Travellers were issued informal police warnings, telling them to leave the area or face arrest, sometimes referred to by officers as protesters as Section 39 notices, though no such statutory power exists by that name. Arrests were made preemptively for obstruction, breach of the peace, or simply intent to trespass. At least one group was chased across fields and detained for attempting to walk towards the stones from an unmarked route. One woman who attempted to hold a solstice meditation with her children near the perimeter reported being surrounded by 6 officers and told to leave immediately or face arrest. In the end, only a handful of people reached the immediate area near the stones. They weren't allowed in the inner circle, and the vigil was watched by dozens of police. A small druid ritual was held under surveillance, accompanied by a silent ring of uniformed officers, a bitter visual echo of past celebrations. Mainstream media largely ignored the non-event, focusing instead on the high cost of policing and the troublemakers allegedly planning to return. A few sympathetic pieces appeared in The Guardian and Time Out, but the bulk of coverage framed the festival ban as a necessary defence of heritage. The irony? The people were being violently barred from a gathering near a prehistoric monument built to mark the solstice itself was mostly lost in the noise. The 1986 shutdown confirmed what many had feared: Stonehenge was no longer accessible. A culture that had gathered there in its thousands, free, defiant, ragged and radiant, was now treated as a public enemy. Steel fences replaced dancing feet, helicopters replaced fire jugglers, riot vans replaced sound systems. The term medieval brigands was notably used by Douglas Hurd, the UK Home Secretary at the time, to describe travellers. This characterisation was widely reported in the media, including the Sun newspaper in 1986. But the spirit didn't die. It just went underground. A number of other relevant events were run in 1986, including the following. Avon Free Festival, Chipping Sodbury, held in May, often considered a spiritual successor to early Stonehenge gatherings, attracted several hundred people, travellers, punks, crusties and DIY sound systems. Heavy police presence, was less violent than the year before, marked by continued presence of ex-convoy members trying to regroup and reimagine the scene. Molesworth Peace Camp gatherings. Though not technically a festival, the Peace Camp at RAF Molesworth, targeted for cruise missile deployment, continued to draw activist gatherings. Deeply Vale Revival. Original Deeply Vale Festival of 1976 to 1979 was long done, but in 1986 some travellers and locals returned to Rochdale Valley for impromptu music and fireside gatherings. Not officially billed, but seen as a nod to Northern Festival roots. Watchfield's Anniversary Meetup, a small symbolic return to Watchfield's site, seen in the 1975 People's Festival, mostly veterans of the Free Festival circuit. No stages, just acoustic sets, campfires, memory sharing. Showed how communal memory itself became an act of resistance. There were also a number of small traveller-run festivals across southern and western England. Small, short-notice events took place, including in Somerset, Devon, Cornwall and Wales. There were also solstice ceremonies at alternative sites, for example Stanton Drew, Avebury and Rollright Stones. Quiet, respectful but symbolic acts of cultural survival and spiritual defiance. By 1987, the long shadow of the Battle of the Beanfield still stretched across the Wiltshire plains. It had been 2 years since police smashed up the convoy. 2 years since riot vans, helicopters and mounted officers had turned a sun celebration into a siege, but the memory hadn't faded, and neither had the urge to return. That year, as the summer solstice approached, a loose web of travellers, druids, punks, pagans and peace protesters set their sights once again on Stonehenge. Not for a full-on festival, that wasn't yet possible, but for something, a gesture, a vigil, a moment at dawn, a claim on memory if nothing else. What they found again was a militarised Wiltshire. Authorities were determined to stop even the smallest gatherers. Again, over 600 officers were mobilised in and around Salisbury Plain. Steel barriers, temporary checkpoints and exclusion orders encircled the area. Military vehicles were spotted in Shipton Bellinger, around 10 miles from the Stones. Anyone arriving in a living vehicle, wearing a C&D badge or even carrying drums or cloaks was stopped, searched and turned away. Some were escorted out of the county entirely. The area surrounding the Stones became a surreal state operation. A handful of peace walkers treated as though they were insurgents. Still, they came. A caravan of 3 buses and a few battered vans made it to within a couple of miles before being surrounded and redirected. One bus was reportedly searched 5 times in a single morning. After 30 people managed to reach the outer area near the fenced-off monument, among them were druids, ex-travellers and ex-convoy folk, including some who'd lost vehicles and friends in 1985. At dawn, under the staring eyes of the police line, a brief solstice ritual was held. No amplification, no sound system, just song, incense and whispered names. By this time, cracks had begun to show in the public narrative. Letters to local papers began to question the cost of Stonehenge clampdowns. Some called it a police overreaction to a few druids and eccentrics. Others worried about civil liberties, noting that people had been arrested simply for looking like a hippie. But the national media largely stayed quiet. BBC and ITN ignored the vigil. Only Peace News and a few local Salisbury papers gave it column inches. One Salisbury resident, quoted in the local press, said, "Seems like a lot of muscle to stop a long-haired types lighting candles." Stonehenge in 1987 wasn't a festival. It didn't have lineups or stages or a crowd, but it mattered. It showed that the hunger to reclaim Stonehenge hadn't died, even under surveillance and threat. It marked a pivot point where the movement learned that the next steps had to be smarter, quieter and nimbler. And it seeded the idea that if the solstice couldn't be reclaimed for a festival, it might be done through ritual persistence and thousands of small returns. The fences were still up, but so were their heads. Other events in 1987 included the following: Avon Free Festival near Chipping Sodbury, one of the few surviving remnants of the pre-ban Free Festival circuit. 1987's edition saw a modest crowd of travellers, punks, sound system crews and alternative families. Excuse me. Police were present but less aggressive than in the post-Beanfield peak years. Key sound systems played, including early DIY rave elements creeping into the mix. Torpedo Town Festival, Hampshire, held on land squatted near HMS Daedalus, a commissioned naval air station, organised by a mix of anarcho-punks, bikers and former convoy people. Featured bands including Hawkwind, poetry, workshops, fire shows. Semi-secretive, several thousand people attended. Police response was restrained, though surveillance was noted. Attendees did, however, note that some unruly behaviour at the festival, including several thefts and violence, perhaps an early sign of things to come. Rave proto-gatherings, South England and Wales. While still in infancy, 1987 saw the first stirrings of the mobile rave culture. Travellers and punks linking up with electronic musicians and DIY sound systems. Some small illegal parties in woods, quarries or industrial estates. These was involved into the Castle Morton style events of the early 1990s.